Welcome to the UltraRunning Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Scotty Sando. An UltraRunning evolution of sorts is happening around the country as race directors are working to get more women to their start lines. Case in point, this year, Hard Rock 100 updated its lottery system so that the percentage of women on the starting line would be no less than the percentage that qualifies and enters their lottery. And Hard Rock isn't alone. Officials at the High Lonesome 100, which takes place in the breathtaking Sawatch Range in Colorado, introduced a lottery system to level the gender playing field. They added new rules for transgender and non-binary entrants and a deferment policy for new parents. And at the center of this policy change is the merry dynamic duo of Kelsey Banaszynski and Caleb Efta. Kelsey and Caleb join the show to talk about gender equality, the race policies, how they are implemented, and what the response has been. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the impressive Kelsey Banaszynski and Caleb Efta. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Kelsey Banaszynski and Caleb Efta. Guys, how you doing? It's so good to see you. Thanks for joining the show.
We're great. We're so thrilled to be with you on this Friday.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for making the time. I really appreciate it. So can you tell the folks where you guys are right now? And you live in a pretty terrible part of the world from what I understand.
Life is really hard out here. No, go ahead.
Yeah, we live in Buena Vista, Colorado, which is in the Upper Arkansas headwaters, so just south of Leadville and a few hours outside of Denver.
Are you guys new to the area, or is this a place where you guys have lived for a long time?
Somewhat new. We've been out here seasonally for a while, but we moved full time, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago?
About a year and a half, almost 2 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
We're getting there.
It's been a long-term goal to get out here, so we're stoked to make it happen.
Yeah, COVID really helped with that.
Yeah, it helped in a lot of ways, right?
That's the silver lining.
So you guys are here to talk about, you're the race directors of the High Lonesome 100. And this is going to be some topics which I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time now, which we're talking about gender equality when it comes to entrants especially for women, also your transgender policy, and then pregnancy deferrals that you have for registration, and which is something that I'm really excited about, and I can't wait to get into that. But before we do, I just want to kind of get to know you both a little better. So if you could each, starting with you, Kelsey, kind of give us a background of your running life, and then life as an RD, and let's start there.
Sure. It's probably worth clarifying that Caleb is the RD of High Lonesome and I'm operations director. It gets hairy because we're married and we're both owners and I'm highly involved, but technically he's the RD for what that's worth.
Okay, so he's like the lead singer and you're the backup drummer. Got it.
I'm making all of the things behind the scenes go correctly. He's the good looking one out in front. No, I'm just kidding. He does just as much work, but we divide and conquer essentially. But yeah, to answer your question, so I've been running, I've been an athlete my whole life. I moved out to Colorado in 2015, 16, and that's when I started getting into trail running. And I think a lot of trail runners, I had joined a running group. I didn't really, I was from the Midwest, so I didn't really know what I was doing out here in the mountains, joined a running group. And all it took was a little nudge and 6 weeks of training to sign up for my first 50K, which was dirty 30. It was painful, but I loved it. And ever since then, it's kind of been snowballing. I got pretty lucky because I was living in Denver and running in Golden, and I stumbled across the running group Golden Mountain Runners, and they're who really set things on fire for me, as well as introduced me to Caleb. So not only did I get a community, I got a husband out of it, which was pretty fun. And, about 6 months into us dating, High Lonesome launched. So, if you really want to test your relationship, definitely launch a business in the first few months. We've got lots of good stories from that. But it's trial by fire, and here we are today.
Well, I don't know how many marriage counselors have made a sweet penny off of people who go into race directing together. I'm totally kidding. But before we move on, I got to ask, how you guys, when you guys met at this running group, how did that whole like love fest happen? Who initiated it? Like, what's the story there? I have to know.
You tell it better. You go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the group I kind of co-started the group quite a bit before I met Kelsey, and it sort of transitioned from like a local gear store doing it to just being a community thing. And once I made that transition to community thing, it was like immediately just became a very like close knit friend group. And so I had a very firm like no incest policy, we called it, which was where like people would try to not date inside the circle because it was inevitably gonna like fuck the dynamic up.
Yeah.
And so for years I held fast and I didn't date and I didn't do anything. And then Kelsey showed up and she had a dog with her and she was really cute. And so I made an exception to the rule.
He picked me off from the herd the first day I was there, and
we call it swooping. If
don't
swoop, someone else gets in first.
Yeah.
And so I made a move.
Yeah, and that was pretty much it. I mean, there was like, some other details along the way, but we'll just say from there it was great.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was nice when we finally decided to get married. We got married at the same trailhead we met with the same group. We had like a little elopement and it was really fun.
Do not recommend though eating cake, drinking champagne, and then running. Like we really should have done that after the running, but it was fine.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for a reversal of sorts, I guess.
Yeah.
Caleb, for you, what was your intro into the trail running ultra community?
Yeah, it started while I was in college, and I had a summer where I was working in Kansas, and that's sort of my family is based. And I was primarily a rock climber and couldn't rock climb because there's literally nothing of any topographical nature in Kansas. And so I decided to run just to not get fat and be bored. And my brother-in-law had done a 50K shortly before, I think it was a year or two before that, and just kept talking about it. And I was like, you should do it. And he gave me Dean Karnaz's book and Born to Run, and I like read those. And I was like, this stuff's kind of weird. I don't really know if this is for me. And then like 4 weeks before this 50K, which was in middle of July in Kansas, so it's like 110 degrees and 100% humidity. He was like, you really should do this, man. And I was like so bored and desperate. I was like, okay, fine. But I didn't know anything about running. So I like went out and did a 16-mile run. So like if I can do half, I can probably do the rest. And so I went out and I like did 2 loops and I was destroyed. And I didn't know what was going on. I was bonking, but I didn't know that. And so I was like, what am I supposed to do? And there's a vending machine. And so I had like $5 and like a Coke and a Snickers. And I ate that. And like 10 minutes later, I'm like, I feel like a champion again. So I went out and I went again and got done. It was like, yeah, let's do it. And it's called Psycho Lyco. It's a trail nerds race in Kansas City. And it's 2 50-mile loops it was that way that year. I did the first loop and it was great. And then I went to do the second loop and I got like to the next aid station and it was like mile 18 and I was bonking again. I still didn't know what the hell that was.
I mean,
and
to be clear, you still don't know how to eat.
I'm better.
Still a theme.
It's a persistent theme in my nature. But I just got a lot of help from the aid station and they were super kind and gracious, knowledgeable. And I got done. I was like, this sucks. I'm never doing this again. And then a year later, I did another one, and then a year later, I did another one, and then it just kind of like never really stopped. And it was around like the 3rd or 4th year, I finally decided I'd stop pretending I didn't like running and just commit to being a runner.
Well, what was
I moved to Colorado and
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just have to go back and ask. So after your first lovely, lovely experience of running that first ultra, which didn't sound like the best time. And, thank goodness that vending machine like manifested itself for you. Like this was like oasis of like goodness, right? Of sugary, salty goodness. What compelled you to jump back into the ultra scene again?
That particular time I was studying abroad in London and I was living with some family members and I was going through kind of a 2-part existential crisis. The first girl I ever dated and fell in love with had broken up with me. And I was like, I was end of college and I was sort of realizing like life is transitioning rapidly and I'm not caught up yet. And so I was like going through this like ebb and flow of panic and fear and sadness and everything. And so I was running a bunch. I'd also put on a shit ton of weight and I was like pudgy and I hated it. And I was like, I have to run. And so I was running, and my aunt and uncle, who are just wonderful people, were like, yeah, you should do a race, and we'll go make a little trip of it, and we'll see some British countryside. And they were super supportive, and so I picked up an ultra down on the coast, and I had a blast. It was incredible. It was so fun. Like, British people are one. I love just everything about England, so it was great. And that was a good experience. Then my next one, which was 6 or 7 months later, had a terrible experience out again, and then the next one was good, and so it's sort of been this way.
Yeah. I like to know, like, what is it about, and Kelsey, start with you. What is it about the ultra event that you're drawn to so much?
Oh man, I think I'm just a sucker for the pain. No, I mean, yeah, that's definitely part of it, but I think the idea of pushing yourself, right? I've always been one, whether it's in running or something else, is how uncomfortable can I make myself feel without totally breaking down? Because I've learned that you're not going to die, and you often / always learn something really great from it. So I think that, combined with the people just being amazing and seeing beautiful things, like that combo, and efficiency, honestly, like I can see a lot of things if I hustle through this, a lot of beautiful things if I keep moving. I think those three things for me are kind of what keep me coming back, at least.
Yeah.
I haven't made it to 100 miles yet, though.
You and I both. We'll get there one day. So let's go into and why we're here is talk about the High Lonesome 100. It's what was the I guess why did you start?
We ask ourselves that all the time, Scotty.
Why did you get the idea to start 100? To be the race director, Caleb, of this, and and it's a mountain ultra, so not an easy one. It's not like you're just setting up a 5K or whatever. I mean, we all know that it is a major undertaking to take on something like that. It's so ambitious. So where did the idea begin, and then what was the decision point to actually say we're going to do this and really put ourselves out there?
Yeah. Well, this beginning takes place before I met Kelsey in the swoop. So it started not long after I moved to Colorado, which was in 2013, and I was really running a lot that time, and so racing a lot. And I was chasing qualifiers for Western and Hard Rock, and so I was going to Utah and Wyoming and BC and Washington and stuff to run, and I was having a blast. It's great to see new places and run new trails and meet new communities, but I was constantly a bit annoyed. I'm a homebody, and I was like, I love Colorado. Like, I moved here because this is the place in the world where I want to be all day, every day. And why am I running these incredible races and spending all this time and effort to travel when the places that I want to run are right here? And so I sort of had this incentive and desire to build something that I felt like really represented Colorado and the best of the running that was here. And then simultaneously, as I was doing all those races, I'm a pretty opinionated person, as my friends know. And my inclination is always to the negative, which is something I've worked hard on and have gotten better. But
you have gotten
better, but not there yet. And so if I go to somewhere and I was like, how was it? It was good, but this happened, and I got tired of that. I got tired of always bitching and complaining, and I decided if I was going to be this opinionated, I needed to be more involved, have some skin in the game and be a part of a solution, and not just sitting around kind of armchair quarterbacking everybody else. And so while that was sort of marinating, I always loved the Sawatch. It was the first place I'd ever come to Colorado, and when I started getting curious about it and was like, okay, I think I want to look into this seriously, that it was immediately the first place I looked. And it took not very long to see that there was a ton of potential. I mean, there's two very obvious classic trail corridors, the Colorado Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, and they connected, and you could make a loop of it. And so once I figured that out, I was like, oh man, this was so obvious. Someone's going to get in here first if I don't go first. And so I started working on it. And to your question, kind of like the inflection points, I'm working a full-time job, and this is sort of like a, I don't know, like proof of concept point. I'm not even there yet. I'm just scoping. And it just we just kept clearing these hurdles of the scoping. And I'd be like, all right, well, you know, if we get past this point, or if we get stuck here, I'll wash my hands and be done. And we just kept clipping past those points. And finally it was like, oh, this is gaining steam and momentum. We're going to make this happen. And I think that was probably the fall of 2016. So it was like right around the time we first met. And we finally got like our provisional approval from all of our permitting agencies. And it was like just before Christmas. And it was like, fuck, this is, we're in this now. Like we're putting this on. And I remember when we finally launched registration, the first person registered, I had this like moment of thrill and then just dread. I was like, oh dear God, someone paid me money for this. It's real. That was probably the most acute moment I had.
Yeah. And you're setting them on quite the adventure. And there's a lot of responsibility that goes along with that. So how did the first event go for you?
Oh man. Well,
all the runners were fine and everyone had a good time. So the short answer is it went really, really well.
Yeah.
But we'll stay behind the scenes. There was a lot of learning.
Oh my God. It's insane.
It was actually our worst weather year we've ever had. So it rained the whole like 3 days. We had no idea. Like I think our only saving grace is I made a ton of burritos and we had a ton of beef jerky because I work in the food industry. So I was like talking to my friends, I was like, give me all of your product or whatever. And we just like lived off of that soaking wet for 3 days. And now we cannot touch any of that food ever again. Yeah, it was a little chaotic, but we learned a lot.
Yeah. I think being on the back end of a race, like you sort of, there's like 2 view screens open at the same time. There's like, we're so back end and focused on logistics and ops and putting everything on that we see that. And that's sort of more front and center. And then you've got like the race itself and how that's happening. And oftentimes it's remarkable how unconnected they are in a way. And so we'll be having something on the back end that's just an absolute bonfire of a mess and we're scrambling to fix it. And you go to an aid station and the aid station captain and the volunteers and everybody's happy and they're just rolling. And it's like, and so that was sort of like Tale of Two Cities almost of the first year is we'd done all this work and we had a wonderful team and just enough volunteers and terrible weather. That we pulled it off and people were incredibly complimentary. They were like, this was a great race. You couldn't tell it was the first year, and super supportive. And we were just like, I don't know how the fuck they got that perception. Like we were a dumpster fire.
We just had a lot of really good people, but I think behind the scenes, Caleb and I were kind of hanging on by the skin of our teeth. And
not just us, we had like a kind of a leadership team that stepped up and it was like about 8 or 9 of us. And we were just, I mean, we got done at the race and crashed in a hotel room, and I've never seen to this date anybody that tired as that crew.
Yeah, it almost broke us up too, so that was hilarious.
To the test, like I said, the marriage counselor, right?
Good for everyone.
But I mean, it's like Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. And they've been coming year after year. What is your cap for your field of runners?
Yeah, so it's changed over years, but we're capped at 150. Started at 75 and we moved up by increments of 25 to get to 150.
Is that self-imposed or is that because there are some sort of regulations with the permits you got?
No, that's all based on pretty much just the Forest Service. We're just south of Leadville and they've seen some of the things that happened up there and wanted to be really conservative. Plus we use really remote sections of the Connell Divide Trail, and there's, I think rightly so, a desire to make sure that the character of that trail stays remote, and so they don't want to overload it for other people's experiences as well. So we'd certainly take it a little bit more, but I don't think we'd ever want to go nearly as much bigger. Like maybe 250 would be the max we would ever feel comfortable putting out there.
So can you just give, and folks, I promise we're going to get to these like major topics here, but can you describe the course and the elevation profile, what they could expect out there, and just why it's so meaningful for you guys?
Well, the Sawatch Range is just stunning. It's the tallest range in Colorado, and it's beautiful, broad mountains and deep valleys, and just it's just stunning. I'm in love with it. And the course itself starts and does a little lollipop to get into this big loop that's about 80 miles long. And you go from a low of like 8,200 feet all the way up to 13,100 feet. There's, I think, 6 significant climbs and countless just mini rollers and small punchy ones. So there's 23,500 vertical feet of gain. And that's an honest 23.5, like not a padded one. And 68% single track, goes over 5 passes, and we give a 36-hour cutoff. So it's got just about everything. I mean, it's challenging and hard and relentless, but it's also accessible and attainable for someone wanting to do it as their first time 100. And so what we've seen is that, you know, you can come in and be a novice and have a great race or have a terrible race, and you can come in a veteran and have a great race or have a terrible race. It's sort of indiscriminate in how it does it, but it's really fun to be able to have first timers and, you know, more or less legends coming in at the same place and having similar experiences.
Right. So so you guys have the distinction of having the first ultra in North America to allocate the same number of spots for men and women. It's 50-50 split. And so where did that idea come from? Where was that born?
Yeah, I'd qualify that I don't know if we feel comfortable saying we're the first to ever do 50-50 across the board. We're certainly the first lottery to ever do that. I think we're the first one to do it, period, like you said, but there's so many races, and, you know, we didn't really have the bandwidth to dig into all the, you know, 800 or 900 ultras that are in the country.
There's just not, people aren't watching it half the time either, so
Yeah.
you don't know, but yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It always been something that I had been on my radar, because I knew after the first year we were going to become a lottery. And we figured, based on like kind of the math, we'd hit there about year 5. And so, you know, we chatted about it, but then we sold out the 3rd year in 8 minutes at 1 a.m, and had a wait list like 150 deep by 12 minutes. And we were like, shit, this is it. We're at that pivot point now. And I don't remember the like.
I can tell you where it came from.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we started thinking about a lottery, we were also thinking at that time about other policies that we wanted to put in place that were community oriented and, you know, obviously like signaled to people like what our values were. And so what we ended up doing was having a night where we invited a lot of the Front Range running community over, and we basically did like a brainstorm of against some of the problems we were going to be facing, and specifically with the lottery. And I work in innovation for the food industry, so I kind of just like took a lot of what I was doing there and applied it to that same night, and basically asked, like, you know, in order to create a fair lottery, what do you guys think we should be doing? And one of the ideas, and it actually kind of came up towards the end, was what about a 50-50 split? And I think we had thought about it, but not terribly seriously. And by the end of that night, we just said, raise up your hands if you guys want this. And everyone raised their hands. And we were like, well, this is a little bit terrifying, honestly, to do, but if everyone wants it, and this is our running community, then I guess why the fuck not? Let's charge ahead.
And that sort of, I think, kicked us from a conceptual idea of this is like just an idea, and dug us in like, how would we make this happen? And so, you know, we were lucky because we've got the ability to learn from some other significant races that have lotteries, like Western States and Hard Rock, and then, you know, Wasatch and Cascade. There's some other ones out there that we could look at and sort of glean a lot of knowledge from, so we didn't have to potentially like make a mistake to learn from it. So,
Caleb, let's talk a little bit about the lottery angle to this and why that's important to this whole, I guess it's all mathematical, right? So why is the lottery process so important to this aspect of the story?
Yeah, well, like we said earlier, there was, you know, conceptually having a 50-50 split was aligned with our values, and we wanted to do that and reflect that and make sure our lottery reflected that. But also the reason why it's important for that to be a part of the mathematical question is because lotteries build in implicit biases and skews based on a couple different factors. And so, we used Hard Rock and Western kind of the most to look through and kind of glean some things that we wanted to do differently for ours. But if you look, Hard Rocks, for example, that it's really easy to run the model and see that at the rate that women were applying and the rate that men were applying and the way that they used previous finishes as a heavy ranker in their lottery function, that women would be less and less in the race easily over a course of 5 to 10 years if nothing was done to correct it. And so when we looked at that, we're like, oh, we have to make sure that the formula itself doesn't create a sort of a bias against or for a specific group that isn't something that we want it to be that way for. And since we did want to do finishes as part of our weighting, we had to figure out how we would break it down mathematically. And so, I think that's one of the things a lot of people look at and they're like, well, if people are just applying, what's stopping them from applying, right?
There's no reason for you. Yeah.
There's so many reasons, right? If it's not a completely random unweighted lottery, it's not actually mathematically, statistically, fair if you're ranking it based on criteria that are arbitrary. And so since all of the lotteries rank on arbitrary information because that reflects their value systems, we wanted to make sure ours did too. And when we looked at it and we kind of ran it down, the only way to guarantee that we wouldn't have a baked in discrimination against women in the race was to actually split it 50-50 and say from ground zero, essentially, it's going to be split evenly. And we had it in there, not enough women applied and there was open spots, then those spots go to the other pool. If that spot also had open spots, then no lottery. And so we sort of set it up to not be symbolic, but also, made sure we started from some place that we felt like would go and hold that balance.
What year did you initiate that?
So it started for the 2020 lottery and our first running was 2017. So it was for our fourth year, it was after our third year, but we started working on it year and a half before that. I mean, it was a long process.
I thought it was in the winter.
I think it started right.
It feels like a year and a half because we didn't have a race in 2020.
No, we announced it before we went into the 2019 race.
So it was? Okay.
Yeah, so we started working on this
I have
for a
terrible
while.
memory, so it's fine.
Yeah. So our fourth year, we had the lottery, it went great. Then COVID hit, we had to cancel the race. So we had another lottery, but we rolled over most of our entrants. So the lottery was really small. It's for like the people who didn't roll over essentially. And then this past year's lottery was like the second, full or complete lottery, depending on how I want to say it.
Yeah.
So we've had 3 years of lottery, 3 years without.
So I didn't ask this question before, which month is your race in?
It's in July.
And when is your lottery?
Lottery opens January 1st, or not January 1st, but usually like whatever the weekday is after the holiday.
Okay.
Right, that's when registration happens. So the lottery takes place
2 weeks after that.
2 weeks after that.
So mid-January.
Yeah, mid-January.
So this year was kind of like your first real tried and true foray into like, how will the system go? So how did that go for you guys this year?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think the lottery, we'd already seen it work conceptually because the lottery itself happened months before COVID actually existed in our minds. But it was nice to have the lottery, no interruption, have the race and see that go. And it went great. I mean, both years went great. We didn't have any issues in either of them minus COVID. We did have a last minute spike of COVID that came out of some of the races before us. And so we lost about 3 aid station captains, 10 or 11 runners. And so it's sort of this like last minute email to the wait list, because we do have a wait list for both genders, like 3 days before the race. And we just send it to literally 40 people in each one. And we're just like, anybody wants to go, you can come in. So
yeah, so still not a perfect year, but I think overall it went really well. And I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just where I was at in the race and bandwidth or whatever, but what I heard a lot, what I felt a lot, energy wise, was that people were super stoked to see that many women or an equal amount of women to men in a race. Like it just really changed the feeling of things. And it was everyone across the board. It wasn't just women that were excited. It was everyone that was there was really stoked. And frankly, I think the competition was, I don't know, I just felt like people were really pushing because I don't know, it felt even, you know?
Yeah.
So let me get to this question about have you guys received any negative feedback or comments from folks who weren't stoked about this policy? And what was that
you're
like?
Talking about like there's never armchair quarterbacking on things like this, Scotty. Everyone has been absolutely thrilled.
You're right. I've seen Twitter stuff never goes wrong.
Oh man, no, I'm very risk adverse, and Kelsey's much of a go-getter, and so I was terrified of the rollout and announcement. You know, it's a 3-year-old race. Like, what the hell are we doing? Making a stand this young and all that kind of jazz. But I think the vast majority, and we're not exaggerating, like the vast majority of it was very positive. And then there were some very loud and obnoxious people who voiced their disapproval in very non-constructive ways.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it was just like you see in the rest of society. You have people that are sexist, don't want to call themselves sexist, but it's thinly veiled sexism, and people that armchair quarterback. And so, yeah, of course, there were people that really weren't thrilled with it. But, you know, a lot of the things people said were just dumb, honestly. Like, obviously out of touch with reality, out of touch with like the problems we're facing. You know, I think one of the biggest ones was, well, nobody's stopping women from signing up. Why do you have to hold spots for them? And we're like, of course nobody's stopping women from signing up. But again, if you like read through why we're doing this, our lottery is weighted. And right now we're not seeing as many women run 100-mile distances as men. And so therefore, if we weight a lottery now without correcting for this, kind of like what Caleb explained, it's going to build in bias over time and we'll keep women out. So we've got to do something about that. And but people don't want to really hear the reasoning, you know?
Yeah. And it was pretty obvious. I mean, we like good feedback because that's important for us to hear and integrate into our race. It's why we send surveys out to runners and volunteers after every single event we put on. And we use that, even if it's sort of not always nice to hear that you didn't do something quite right. But the vast majority of the people who were negative on it weren't even reading the policy. They didn't actually know the specifics of what we were doing. And so it was just like, look, if you actually disagree with us, that's one thing. Let's have a conversation. Let's discuss the specifics and maybe how we're doing it versus why we're doing it. But most of them were just like Kelsey said, I mean, they were blatantly sexist. I don't even think they were thinly veiled. It was just absolute sexism.
I was being kind. Maybe I shouldn't be as kind.
I won't be as kind. It was obvious. And you know, it was disappointing at the same time, but I think it was tempered because we got so much of the positive feedback. And then when the lottery rolled around, the response was overwhelming. We had more people sign up for our lottery that year than had ever signed up or been on the wait list in any previous year. Wow. And so to get that sort of resonance back and say, this is working for people was really encouraging.
So I got so many questions for you guys on this on this topic. No, it's really great. I should have got a beer. So
do you want to take a break and get one?
No, it's okay. It's okay. I just want to get, you know, kind of comfortable getting the zone here. But so starting off with the kind of negative feedback that you get. So if someone comes to you and says, Caleb, I don't agree with your policy. What is your kind of your immediate response to someone with that take? Do you have like, you know, just an automatic response to that?
Tell me why. You gotta, I can't respond to you if you just give me, I don't like it. Yep. That doesn't help anybody out here. And then, you know, usually people first say that way face to face. They usually only feel comfortable saying that and, you know, digital means.
I was gonna say, I don't think we've ever got face to face negative feedback. Okay.
Well, as you said, I'm the pretty face of the race.
Yeah, you are the pretty face.
No, I'm you know, like I like to debate things because I find value in discussing them and hearing people's thoughts and hearing my thoughts bounce against theirs and sort of the repartee. But it's not common that someone comes up and says, I don't like what you're doing. Here's a really, really detailed response to it. Usually it's someone comes up and says, hey, I like what you're doing, but this part sticks with me in a way that I don't like. Can I talk to you about it? And that's usually where I'm like, yes, like if I have the bandwidth, let's do this now. If not, let's schedule a meeting and we'll talk through it then.
You mean have a conversation like adults? Wow. Caleb, I think
yeah. I mean,
have you seen the internet?
Yeah. I mean, most of our conversations probably do happen over email, just because we see most people during race day, and usually during race day, we're fried.
Yeah.
People are also fried, and we're all very conscientious of that and respectful of it. But yeah, I mean, generally, I think the people that disagree with us do it in a fairly constructive way. And then there's a small proportion of those people that just disagree with us because that's just who they are.
So, Kelsey, you mentioned something that, about there not being, I won't say enough women running ultras, but that there is a disparity there of the amount of men running ultras and against the amount of women running ultras. So what do you think are some contributing factors to women, not more women running mountain ultras or just ultras in general?
What do I think are the reasons women aren't doing them as much?
Yeah.
I think there's a number of them, right? But I think you have to look at history. Women started running essentially later than men, right? Look at when the first woman entered into a marathon, when the first Olympic women's marathon happened. It was over, a half a century after men. So one, we're playing a little bit of catch up. Two, the way that our society is structured, the amount of time women spend in like non-paying, essentially household tasks or family tasks. You can look, there's some really great studies. I really like the one, there's a American Time Use study. They do it every couple of years and they look at a breakdown of men, women, different ages, who's spending time doing what. And hands down, year over year, women spend, it depends on how you break this out, but anywhere from an extra 60 minutes to 80 minutes a day doing these like non-paid work, which can be cleaning, taking care of the kids, cooking, grocery shopping. And so, I think that combined with, history combined with our time where it's being spent, what do you need for ultras? You need time. You need time to invest. And so I just think, I don't think it has anything to do with women not wanting it, women not, wanting to be challenged, women not wanting to be outdoors, any of these silly things that people like to say that are completely unfounded. I just think it's the way our society is set up doesn't promote women engaging in some of these really time-intensive races. And I think you see that too with like shorter distance races, especially at like the marathon level. It's pretty much, I think, 50-50 split, if not in some cases more women than men.
I think internationally it's actually slightly higher for women
right
than men.
And so as that distance goes up, you see less and less women participating. So I mean, that's my theory, right? I'm not like a researcher in this, but that's just what I see. And I think visibility too, right? You look at these hundreds, historically, it's been maybe 20% women participating in 100-mile races. Well, just like anyone else, who's going to look at a race where they don't see a lot of people like them and go, I should go and do that? You're just less likely to do it. Yeah. So I think that was a big part of why, we wanted what we did, because we felt like if we kind of set a standard and say like, look, women can do this just as well as men, like here, start showing up, like that'll start to create, some momentum.
Yeah. And I think to caveat on that too, like, one of our goals was to bring in first time 100-mile women. Mm-hmm. Like we wanted that to be a space where they were coming in and doing it. And so I think when you look at a lot of the other races that are sort of in the same scope of what High Lonesome is, mountain ultra in the West at high altitude, most of the women that come in are very experienced. Like they've done this before. They're capable, competent people that can get a result out of this. We saw that in our own data in the first couple of years, like incredibly strong, capable women running our races. And we're like, this is awesome. We want these people, but we also want to get more women to their first 100-mile buckle. And so that lottery and making the qualifiers, the pregnancy deferral, and a couple of other things really open and accessible to women helps sort of compensate for those societal issues that typically dampen it.
Kelsey, this question for you. What sort of like firsthand testimony have you received from women who showed up to your start line? Have they addressed this with you what has their response been to this specific point about your race?
I mean, they love it. I mean, it's just so wonderful to see people who look like them there, right? Like to be standing beside so many women. And I think that oftentimes people will comment, we've got an out and back section from our St. Elmo aid station to our Cottonwood aid station. And that usually blows people's mind, honestly, because that's when they're getting to see who's behind them, who's around them. And so, yeah, I think women typically just say, like, I am just like flabbergasted. I am blown away. It felt like I belonged here. It was so fun to be around people who were like me, who were another woman, and so I think, and you see that at 100-mile races, like you're racing yourself for the most part, right? Of course, there's some competition, but like you're bonding together with the people around you. And so I think women really have enjoyed, and honestly, men too. I mean, I get just as many comments from men as I do women saying like, that was really fucking cool to see like an equal split. So it's not just a women's thing,
That's so true. And, I think that you just answered like kind of the beauty of why you do this. It's that women feel accepted. They're having fun. They are bonding out there, and men too. And so, I mean, really kind of that really is at the center of this whole entire operation here. And I think we have to kind of look back at history, right? And you alluded to it earlier about how, women haven't been included in a lot of these sports. I realize that today is different, but we have this whole like short-term history here where women like are generally just getting into this, relatively speaking, of these events. I mean, in our modern day history, a woman entered the Boston Marathon and some people tried to stop her while she was running it. You can go on the internet, you can find that photo. You can find the photo. It's not a hieroglyphic. It's not in some sort of like subscript somewhere. This happened in our modern day history.
1967, that's when that happened. Yeah.
And we are not far from that. And so, kind of leading into the next part of this conversation, when we're talking about the inclusion of people, it is your transgender policy, which I understand is a very controversial topic. And again, it's something that I really want to talk about and give you guys a platform to talk about what it is and why you did it. So what is it and why did you do it?
Actually, do you feel like this one's been that controversial? I don't feel like we get too much feedback on it, I guess.
No, I think in the initial launch, it was actually...
Or was it hidden a little bit with all that we were doing?
No, on social media, it was surprising how many people commented on it in sort of a like uneducated way. Again, very obvious they hadn't read the policy or knew how we were addressing it and stuff like that. But I wouldn't say it was controversial. Like once that initial announcement wore off, we've never had anybody come up to it and be like, I have a problem with this, or screw you guys for having this policy.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Caleb. I don't mean to say that your policy in specifically was controversial. I think that transgender in sports has been a hot topic. So I guess that's what I was trying to address.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. You can edit out that section if you'd like. Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those spots where like we talked about it. And then because Western states had come out with a policy and we read it and we were in the middle, literally in the middle of like creating our own, kind of large overarching, we call it our community policies, like the lottery change, pregnancy deferral, and this popped up. And I think Kelsey just was like, I want to do that, and grabbed it and workshopped it. And I think you can speak better to it than I can.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was just really a no-brainer, right? I mean, again, it comes back to one of our core values, which is inclusion. And so Western states did a bang up job, I think being one of the first, but the IOC, there's plenty of other organizations that have a policy in place. So I guess for us, it really didn't feel challenging. And I think it felt really important to make sure people knew, to see it on paper, that, yeah, you're absolutely.
Yeah. I think it was always sort of one of those things where we just didn't really know why it wouldn't be welcoming. Like we were just like, why wouldn't you feel races? And then we realized like, oh, this, I don't know, aura and fear that we were just oblivious to because we aren't in that space. And so Western, I think, was really, really helpful in just popping that bubble with a lot of people in our place and just being like, oh shit, yeah, it's not hard to do this. It's really easy. It's really easy to do it scientifically and fairly. And we can do it safely and privately and professionally. Like, wow, okay, let's just do it. And it was so easy. And you talked to a couple of transgender centers and got some input from them to revise some stuff. And it was great.
Yeah, and they're I talked with one group. It was the National Center for Transgender Equity. Because again, I'm not a transgendered individual, but so I wanted to make sure I was talking to experts that helped us build this language in a way that, again, was welcoming and inclusive. But yeah, I don't know if that totally answers your question, because to us, honestly, it was just such an easy thing to do. And we were like, yeah, absolutely, we'll stand up for you and we'll make sure we hold a place for you to run as you are, right? I think that's what it is at the end of the day, whether you're, no matter what you are, male, female, trans, like whatever, please come as you are.
Yeah, and just to that point, like while we were doing that, we were also like, oh, well, we should have a non-binary policy too, because that's definitely something like people orient. And so like, yeah, it's like male, female, or otherwise, like, we got you, you can be here. And here's a way for you to do it and do it fairly and safely, and it'll be great.
We're all runners at the end of the day, right? I mean, that's just it. You just want to come run, please come run.
Yeah, it's, if there is one place on this earth in terms of an organization or activity, I think that it is running on a trail outside in nature where it should be welcoming to everybody. I don't care about your race, your background, your religion, any of it. Unless you're like an axe murderer, then get the hell off the trail. So,
yeah, we have a hard no policy on. Yeah.
A hard no policy on no axe murderers. That's fantastic.
Yeah. No murder is allowed. Yeah.
But it's so important to draw these distinctions in these events, and have other race directors reached out to you to talk to you about your lottery process. What's that been like?
Yeah, I think we've both gotten people reaching out to us. I think we sort of do a pretty organic job of splitting. Like we sort of intuitively know like which conversation's best suited for Kelsey and I. And so we've each sort of like gotten those threads and had those conversations. But yeah, we've gotten plenty of races that have reached out asking for, like questions you were asking, like what was the feedback, sort of like sensing the waters. Is this controversial? Am I going to shoot myself in the foot? And we have glowing reviews of our experience, and so we pass that along. We have less people asking about our lottery, honestly, than they do about our community policies.
Yeah, so it's usually on the community policies, but I think the way we both approach it is trying to understand, what they want in their race and understanding their values, right? And I think most of our community policies, everything besides the lottery, I think, frankly, should be applied to all races.
Agreed.
The lottery is something unique for us. It works for us. It may not work for everyone. Now, that doesn't mean that we address some of the inequalities that are happening in your race, but I think what we're trying to say is lottery might not be the solution for everyone. But I do think our transgender and non-binary policy, the pregnancy policies, everyone should have those, because it helps with inclusion.
Especially that pregnancy policy.
Yeah, that's made a big difference.
Such a low bar. Like the fact that like UTMB still doesn't have a policy for pregnancy deferrals, or did but didn't communicate it. I mean, it's like, get in the modern fucking age, man.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So what is your policy? Who does it apply to? I thought this was really interesting when I was reading your policy online, and think it's something that is so like, it's such a no-brainer that it's like, how in the hell did this not happen earlier? And thank goodness it's starting to take, but Let's hear it. What are you guys doing?
You want me to take this?
No, I like this one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this came up in that brainstorming session that Kelsey had organized, and most of the conversation we were having was around, not most I'd say, but a significant portion was around childcare. And it was like, I don't have time to train, my body's recovering, I just went through this huge hurdle, how am I supposed to qualify for this race if I only have a year to do it? And so we'd always had a 2-year qualifying window, so you could run, I should say always. First year we had it was 10-year, I was super generous, but we were tightening it up as we knew the demand was. We were sort of watching the numbers, try to get the right ratio. And we've had a lot of friends in that community of ours that were starting to have children. They were in their late 20s, early 30s, and they started. And we just kept seeing firsthand with friends the challenges it was be an athlete, have a child, and then come back to be an athlete.
Both if you were carrying, physically carrying the child, or if you were a partner that was helping support. I mean, it's an astronomical thing to take on energy wise, right? And even in really healthy, supportive relationships where both partners are sharing as much of the load as can be equally shared as they can be, it's hard to train. It's damn near impossible to train. And so when we made the policy, we just asked people, how long would you need to have a child, get pregnant, have the kid, recover, get back into the running scene, and get a qualifier? What do you need for that? And almost unanimously, the answer was 3 years. I need 3 years. That gives me a little bit of cushion, but not a ton. I can make that work. And I think the guys were maybe more 2, and the women were more 3, and we're 3 it is. So we said 3 years. Either gender, either sex, anybody in the partnership can claim it. You also don't have to birth a child. You can adopt a child, right? It's regardless of gender or the way that you have had a child come into your life.
Yeah, and I think we got more positive support out of that than the gender equity stuff that we did in the lottery when we first announced. It hit a nerve, it seemed where people were aware of it, but were quiet about it. And as soon as they saw it supported, they were finally, thank fucking God this is here.
Well, I think we just weren't acknowledging how much it's so friggin' depressing, right? You try so hard to get into these qualifiers and to get in these lotteries, and you're waiting for years and years and years, only to be having to make a choice. Do I want a family, or do I want to get into this race? That's insane. That's insane to me. That's not how, obviously it's not how we think it should be. And that's why we've developed this policy. Yeah.
I think that's so admirable. And it's also again, it's so dumbfounding to me. It's how did this not happen earlier? But just to ask the question, how much time do you need before you think you could get back into, running a 100-mile distance again?
Scotty, are you saying that as a man, I shouldn't have made that choice for women with no personal experience of my own to base that on?
No,
is that what you're saying?
No, not at all. But I'm just saying that it's such a wonderful question just to get that feedback of just, of saying, what do you need? What do you need? This is I guess it's we are so beholden to other people making decisions for us, right? Without even asking us, what do you need? What would make this work for you? And I think we need more of that, where you are really promoting the conversation of having the conversation. And it's just it's a breath of fresh air for me to be talking with you and really getting a sense of who you are as a human being, that you truly care, and that it's not just don't take a soundbite and run with an opinion about it. I want you to learn and understand what it is I'm doing and why, and then we'll have a conversation about it. And maybe I'll come away with, some understanding of maybe something I hadn't considered before, and it's brought to my attention, and that makes us better. That makes us all better. And that's why I really value and applaud what you're doing, because you're making us better. You're making ultra running, mountain running better. And there's an absolute place for this. And I hope that there's an RD out there, or aspiring RD out there, who's listening to this, who can reach out to you guys to, take that and run with it. So it just becomes more common in in our culture because we need it. I mean, we are so polarized as a country right now. I don't mean to go off on a tangent here, but I am.
Send it, Scotty, send it.
But we're so polarized, and we're so like, we're like these tribes, right? We've got all these like, you're not like me, I don't like you, sort of like thing going on here. We don't need that, especially when it comes to our ultra running community. It has no place here. And so for folks to like admonish what you're doing here without really getting to the nuts and bolts of why, and say that, well, how is this progress? It absolutely is progress. If you are telling me as like a white male or a male that you disagree with the gender equality or something else, or transgender or the pregnancy deferral, it's like, okay, well, that's a funny story. Well, how about you go talk to someone who's a woman? Go talk to someone who's trans. Ask them for their opinion. Until you like lived their lives, I don't want to hear why you think it's a bad idea or how it's not progress. What isn't progress is having someone telling you no, that's completely unsubstantiated, and it's really unfair, and it's high time that we got to get away from that.
Yeah, there's a big lack of critical thinking going on right now, whether it's within the running, it's just everywhere, right? Like we love to jump on thought trains, and I mean, you just see it everywhere. And so the critical thinking, the asking why, and let's be real, right? There's still things that we can do better. We're still having conversations on how to improve these policies, and we welcome commentary. Like to Caleb's point, honestly, this man does really love to debate. And so if you guys want to debate with him, please bring it on. It's like one less thing I need to do in my day. But no, but truly, like we love to get feedback as long as it's constructive, right? And critical, and like has critical thinking involved, because we're not going to get anywhere, to your point, right? And
we get into these like circle conversations with ourselves where we're just like agreeing with each other, but just keep saying it in different ways. And we're like, oh yeah, someone's doing, I don't know. We just keep spinning. And the thing that we think we finally were able to like distill some of our spiraling conversations down to is like, we're not here to debate whether the earth is round or not.
Yeah.
It's round. Science says that. I respect that some people disagree with that.
Do you know?
I don't respect them, but I respect that they do. And so it's the same thing in these conversations, right? It's like, I understand that some people don't believe that there is any form of gender imbalance in the sport.
Or imbalance for minority, like,
bringing that into like this specific microcosm of the world, like I understand that people don't do that. I am not your apologist for that. I am not here to convince you in basic science, basic fact, basic data points. It is so abundantly attainable to get that data and that information from any place you want to look, the internet or your friends. It's there. And so we're not interested in having these conversations where someone's just like, I don't believe that there's a problem with gender equity in the sport. I don't believe transgender people should exist. We're not having those conversations with you. You can have those with other people. That's fine. Maybe they deserve to be heard. But we're willing to have just about every other conversation past that point. I agree with that this is a baseline problem, but I have significant disagreements on how to solve it. Those are great conversations because every race, every community, every group of runners is going to have a unique perception. And that's how we crack these things. We don't crack it by like single monolithic thinking where one person drives the whole thing. We think this by diverse thinking. If we want diversity in our sport, we need diversity in thought. We need diversity in solutions. Like that's how you get better. And so I think that's where like, we don't want to sound like we're not accessible to have these conversations, but we also don't want to sit here and sort of enable conversations that are so fundamentally unnecessary and waste our time on those conversations when we could put that towards something else.
Ladies and gentlemen, join Team Caleb, will you? Join us over here. It's such a wonderful conversation, and again, I keep saying it, it's just refreshing to hear your point of view, to know what you're doing, and and holding it lightly and moving forward. And I'm really proud of you guys. I mean, you put yourselves out there, And
you should come out here. You're really making us feel good. If you could be our neighbor and just like, positively reinforce us every morning, great.
hell yeah, brings me out to Colorado. I'm in. Let's go.
You're welcome anytime. Yeah.
Hey,
No,
Caleb.
Thank you for giving us a platform here.
Absolutely. And anything that I can do for you guys, please let me know. But you guys sounds like you've got it all under control. So keep up the great work. And I hope more people take a beat from what you're doing. And it's long overdue, and it's so needed. And it's little differences like this that really have huge impacts on people. Think about all the women now who, how there are more women running your event now than previously would have, that can be that can promote women's running back in their own community. And that's why it's so important. So if you ask, well, how do we get more women involved in the sport? That's by bringing more women into the sport and giving them access and making them feel like they've got a place, right? And that way they can go back and influence someone else, because I guarantee you that's happening. Women are going back home and saying, I did this great freaking run. It was like half women. You won't believe it. I'm like, oh my gosh, you've got my attention. Tell me more. So keep it up, you guys. Awesome job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scotty.
You got it. Well, until we see each other again, thanks for your time and have a brilliant weekend, man. And I would love to be out there as a volunteer or whatever at one of your races. Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Let's get on it.
You're
Come on and
welcome.
join us.
You're welcome. In race season or non-race season, come and visit.
I would love it. You can count on it.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, you guys.
Scotty. Well, you take care.
Thank you so much for your time.